أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pemirsa yang dirahmati Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, jumpa lagi di channel Zaman Akhir. Bagaimana kabar semuanya? Semoga sehat walafiat dan dalam lindungan Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Pemirsa yang dirahmati Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, video kali ini masih membahas tentang Khazar, sebuah imperium dan juga nama suku bangsa yang pernah berkuasa di Pontic Caspian Steppe atau padang rumput Pontic Caspian. Khazar muncul dari reruntuhan Gokturk Barat yang mulai membusuk. Suku yang bergabung dalam konfederasi membentuk Kekaisaran Khazar, Sabir, Saragur, Samandar, Belajar, dan beberapa lagi. Kemunculan Khazar sebagai sebuah kaganet atau imperium telah menimbulkan keresahan beberapa negara di sekitar.
Persia membangun benteng pengawas untuk selalu mengamati gerakan orang-orang dari utara. Bizantium segera menjalin aliansi militer dan juga dinasti dengan Khazar, dan terbukti aliansi Bizantium Khazar dapat mengalahkan Persia di Kaukasus. Pada periode kemunculan Khazar sebagai sebuah kekuatan, Islam juga mulai berkembang mencapai wilayah Suriah, Irak, Persia, dan Mesir. Berbeda dengan Persia dan Bizantium, kekhalifahan Islam tidak melakukan aliansi atau membangun benteng pengawas. Islam siap menghadapi dan berhadapan dengan siapapun. Sifat ekspansionis Khazar yang bengis dan kejam, kemudian berhadapan dengan dakwah Islam yang mulai diterima banyak suku dan bangsa di sekitarnya. Bentrokan antara keduanya tak dapat dihindari. Peperangan dengan Khazar terjadi pada masa Khulafa Rasyidin yang disebut sebagai fase pertama Islam versus Khazar. Perang di masa Bani Umayyah disebut sebagai fase kedua perang Islam versus Khazar.
Bagaimana kelanjutan videonya? Mari kita saksikan bersama. Tetapi sebelumnya, berikan like, komentar, subscribe, dan tekan loncengnya.
Khazar state from the ruins of a decaying Western Turkic Khaganate, we must first go back a few centuries in order to establish just who they were and how they came to be. We know that the tribes which would eventually coalesce into the Khazar Empire were living in an area of the Pontic Caspian Steppe, straddling the northwest shore of the Caspian Sea, and probably formed part of the eastern section of the Hunnic tribal hierarchy. These horse-born warriors did what such nomadic peoples almost always did when rubbing up against the borders of settled civilization. They raided and plundered relentlessly, extracting vast amounts of wealth from the South Caucasus region. Halfway through the 6th century, the Khazars had subjugated almost all of the tribes north of the Caucasus Mountains, such as the Sabirs, Saragurs, Samandars, Belanjars, and others. That didn't mean they were the region's overlords, however, because the middle 500s also saw Yabgu Istami and his lethal Gurk-Turk cavalry armies rampage west in pursuit of whatever remained of their former Avar rulers, whom the Celestial Khagan considered rogues. This conquest of the western regions of the steppe seems to have brought the Khazars under Ashina rule without much resistance, and the newly incorporated nomads became members of the Turkic Khaganate's circle of elite inner tribes, indicating their strength and importance as the Khazars formed a
Kavad I and his son, Khusru I, had to specifically build fortresses along the borders of their empire to ward off Khazar raids. The most famous of these fortresses was Derbent, still standing today. In the 7th century, the Khazars seized several to flee, some to the north and others into southeastern Europe to the place that bears their name today, Bulgaria. Others were simply content to live under Khazar rule. Of course, these expansions didn't go unnoticed by the other great power in the region, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. However, instead of facing them in battle, early Byzantine emperors chose instead the path of diplomacy and flattery, offering valuable gifts and even their daughters as wives to Khazar rulers. Such alliances proved useful, as when the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius was able to leverage his ties with the Khazars in his war with the Sasanian Empire.
Were also the time of Islam's stunning initial conquests, which took over Syria, Palestine and Egypt, and even put a final nail into the coffin of Sassanid Persia. More relevant to our story is the northern advance of the Rashidun armies, which eventually stood before the mighty Caucasus Mountains chain by 640.
After the dissolution of Sassanids in Iran, its northern regions were under the noticeable influence of Khazars. On the other hand, the continuous attacks of Arab troops to Iran accelerated the foreseeable collapse of Persian Empire. In 633, in the Battle of Qadisiyah, Muslims destroyed Sassanid army and advanced towards the north of empire, to Atropatene, which is, first time in the history, called Azerbaijan by Arab sources. After defeating another Sassanid army under the Hamadan, Arabs headed directly to the city of Ardabil, which was guarded by the local Sassanid governor. During the siege of the city, small Khazar units ambushed Arabs twice, but that didn't change the faith of city. As a result, it has fallen to Arabs in 6 months. Afterwards, several Arab units passed Kura River, in order to march further north. At the opposite bank of the river, Muslims faced poorly armed small Khazar unit, with sick horses that can hardly run, and eliminated all of them. These local battles with the Turks falsely convinced Arabs that Khazars don't have the power to resist to their expansion. Parallelly, light-armed Albanian militia, alongside with Khazar cavalry, started to use a tactic of hit and run against invaders. However, even this non-conventional method of defending was not useful in distracting highly motivated Islamic army. According to al-Baladuri, in 639, after the several local struggles, Muslim forces advanced to the Derbend, the northmost city of Caucasian Albania. Since Albanian king was the vassal of Khazars, they sent 3 different units to harass Arabs, and to help Albanians to defend the city. Arabs, under the command of General Bukhair ibn Abdullah, had kept the city under the constant attack, but the city guardians, and the people of Derbend defended city stubbornly. Finally, in 642, Caliph Umar appointed governor of Armenia Salman ibn Rabia, as a commander of Muslim troops, and asked him to take the city, then expand to north as soon as possible. Here, Bukhair told him that, after taking the city, it will be easy to deal with Khazars. According to al-Baladuri, after the arrival of Salman, Arabs succeeded and finally were able to capture the city, and then the new commander consolidated his army in a rush, to attack Turks in the north. Khagan, in turn, after losing his influence in Transcaucasia, started to prepare plans against Muslim invasion. His main goal was to lure Arabs away from their main supply center as far as possible. In 642, Arab contingent with 20,000 heavy forces started to march to the north, while light Khazar units continually lurked around and threatened their supply lines. 2 months later, 2 armies finally faced in the battlefield near the Khazar city of Balanjar. Khazars hid their infantry units in the forests of surrounding mountains, and attacked to Arabs only with light cavalry. Salman, believing to the words previously said by Bukhair, immediately sent his heavy infantry against them in order to conclude the battle early. Khazars, while fighting, retreated to the tight valley in front of the city gates. Arabs in turn, thought that, Turks are retreating to the city, therefore chaotically followed them to enter the city. When they entered to the valley, Khazar infantry units that were hidden in forests, blocked the only exit from the valley. On the other hand, guardians opened the gates, and heavy Turkic cavalry attacked to Arabs from there. Besieged Muslim troops were totally terminated by Turks at the end of the day, and their commanders Salman and Bukhair were beheaded by Tarkan. After the death of Salman, his brother Abdurrahman ibn Rabia had been appointed a new commander of Arab troops in the South Caucasus. According to al-Tabari, he regained the control of Derbent and, in 652, attacked a Khazar territory with the aim of taking revenge of his brother. He destroyed some little villages on his road and reached to the Balanjar soon after.
655, a Khazar army was assembled in the city of Samandar, which later on met up with Abkhazian and Alan warriors. Some sources claim that the Byzantine emperor also sent supplies and auxiliary troops. Marching south, the army met an Arab Muslim force that was under the command of Habib ibn Maslama, a veteran of many battles, especially in the Levant. Though a brilliant commander, Maslama was greatly undermanned. However, Maslama and other Arab commanders were mostly able to hold the line due to their more sophisticated weapons and tactics. The stalemate between the two sides went on for about 15 years, with neither side gaining much in terms of territory. However, political turmoil and eventually civil war encompassed the Muslim world. In 661, the fourth and last of the so-called rightly guided caliphs, Ali ibn Abi Talib, the son-in-law and cousin of her, for our purposes here, the internal chaos within the Arab Muslim Empire weakened their hold on the areas of Georgia and Armenia, allowing both of them to kick out their Muslim governors and become independent. It also gave the Khazars breathing room. They were able to regroup, reorganize, and eventually expand further south into the regions of the southern Caucasus and occupy many of the lands that the Arabs were forced to abandon. The problem, though, was that now it was the Khazars rather than the Arabs who were seen as the oppressors. This is at least according to the chronicles of a certain Pilan of Tirak. He claims that the Khazar army invaded Caucasian Albania, Armenia, and Georgia, destroying much of it, plundering its cities, and taking many prisoners. We're also told that in August of 685, Khazar forces defeated the armies of all three of these nations, with the kings of Armenia and Georgia falling in battle.
The Khazars invading Armenia and instigating a 15-year war, which became known as the Second Arab-Khazar War. The Khazars invaded Muslim lands in modern Azerbaijan in 730, led by Bajik, probably a son of the Khagan. He seems to have been a traditionally merciless steppe warlord who callously ordered his heavily armoured, light-skinned, red-haired and blue-eyed Khazar cavalry forces to slay any Muslim they came across. After marching his main force towards Ardabil, Khazar armies met a 25,000-strong Arab force outside the city walls and totally crushed it, killing its commander Al-Jari ibn Abdallah in the process. It is said that Bajik mounted the dead Arab leader's head on a throne, from which he led the Khazar armies throughout the campaign. However, the victors quickly and unwisely began to scatter throughout the area in search of loot and plunder, which allowed the Arabs to counterattack and drive them back across the mountains. Khazar victory gave way to Muslim success, and so on, a state of affairs which would define this war. It was also an incredibly bitter and brutal clash of civilizations, characterized, as author Arthur Koestler notes, by a distinct fanaticism, which we can see in the extreme actions many of the combatants took. For example, an entire surrounded Khazar village supposedly committed collective suicide by fire rather than surrender to the enemy. Conflict ended when the Muslims managed to invade Khazaria and force the Khagan to convert to Islam, but it seems like a hollow, insincere conversion because we never hear of it again.
As in the year 737, Muslim general Marwan ibn Muhammad invaded deep into Khazaria, forcing the Khagan to surrender and pledge his nation under Sharia law and the allegiance of the Umayyad Caliphate. All had seemed lost for this mighty empire, But then, a miracle occurred that will return Pax Khazaria to the Caucasus and the Pontic steppe. The Abbasid Revolution began in 744, leading to an inability for the Arabs to govern the steppes, leaving the Khagan to return to his full power. It is in this period that the Khazars did what they are known for. Well, I mean, if anybody knows them at all, that is. Yeah, that's right. Their conversion to Judaism. As a letter from the last Khagan to a rabbi in Cordoba will lead us to believe. It's called the Khazar Correspondence. It's one of the main historic documents we have to get information about the Khazars from. And what the Khagan states is that the conversion to Judaism took place in around the late 700s under the rule of Bulan Khagan. Bulan is described as being a pretty cool guy, and he had several visitations from angels, leading him to seek the one true faith.
Although relations with the Byzantine Empire were generally cordial, the Khazars fought extensive wars with the Umayyad Caliphate and its successor, the Abbasid Caliphate. However, the greatest threat to the Khazars and the cause of their eventual demise turned out to be the Rus peoples, who sought access to the waterways controlled by the Khazars. Desiring access to the Arab world for the purposes of trade, the Rus states increasingly resented the levies extracted by the Khazars on their trade fleets. The construction of Sarkel fortress by the Khazars in the 830s or 40s attests to this increasing unease over their worsening relations with the Rus. By the 880s, the Khazars increasingly faced pressure from hostile neighbouring states, in particular the Pechenegs, another semi-nomadic Turkic group, and the Rus warlords, who had wrested control of the 13. A particularly large Rus raid into Arab territories led to a request by the Khwarezmian Islamic Guard units of the Khazar army to be allowed to avenge their fellow Muslims. The subsequent destruction of the Rus forces upon their return led to war between Khazaria and the Rus states. To make matters worse, the Khazar alliance with Byzantium broke down in the early 10th century, and instead the Byzantines began attempting to cultivate relations with the Rus and the Pechenegs. A series of raids over several decades culminated in Sviatoslav of Kiev fighting a massive campaign which saw the fortresses of Sarkel and Tamartaka fall in the 960s before Attil itself was captured and utterly destroyed in the year 968 or 969.
Terima kasih sudah menyaksikan video ini. Jangan lupa subscribe dan tekan loncengnya agar selalu memperoleh video-video terbaru dari kami.